Hello, hello. So most people, upon learning that I study graphic novels, which is the highfalutin term for comic books, graphic novel is really just a comic book that takes itself seriously. Most people, upon learning that and maybe stifling some ridicule or laughter, may not realize that comic books have grown up. In comic books, it is my argument that we have unique opportunities for seeing the social. And by that I mean the way that comic books often depict a single figure in proximate relationship to depictions of community. But before we get to anything so romantic and abstruse and grandiose as that, most people want to know about the movies. Hey, wasn't that one film, From Hell, originally a graphic novel? It was. Wasn't that one movie, A History of Violence, originally graphic? Yes, again, it was. It turns out that there are a lot of movies that take graphic novels as their templates. And some of us who know comics and graphic novels quite well are sometimes a bit disappointed when we see that even those scenes in the films that are the most poignant to see are taken directly from the comic book on which they're based. Leads us to ask, why is it that so many films these days are based on comics? I think one answer has to be that comics provide incredible opportunities for identification. We heard a talk earlier that suggested that the human brain is ideally trained to recognize mind in faces. Comic books love to give us the doll face and imbue the doll face with mind, because we don't just have images, we also have words, and the words are usually accorded to some kind of mind activity. However, another reason is a practical one. The problems that anyone might encounter in telling a story pictorially have already been solved in the graphic novel. All right, let's start with iconic abstraction. This is a panel from Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which is a primer that tries to help us understand how comics make meaning, why they are meaningful. Scott McCloud suggests that realistic depictions actually detract from our ability to take meaning from comics. That he wouldn't be as convincing an avatar if he drew himself more realistically. And that is because he's drawn himself like a cartoon that we tend to give him authority. This, again, has to do with the way we love to see, narcissistically perhaps, faces in just about anything, any sort of ordinary object. The comic, though, is there to suggest that it is in the most cartoonified kind of face that we are able to see a reflection of the face that we might have in our mind's eye of ourselves. And that we are so good at projecting the face onto the two dots in the line because it is there that we find our mind's eye reflection of ourself. As exemplification, let's move to the first panel of Marjane Satrapi's wildly successful autobiography, Persepolis. Here, something else that's important. These books are called graphic novels, but they're usually not novels. They're often based on autobiographies, and most people try to not lie in their own autobiography. This is about Marjane Satrapi's experience of growing up during the fundamentalist revolution in Iran in 1980. First panel just says, "This is me." We are to take the cartoon as an immediate reflection of the author-artist. Interestingly, the second panel, and I want to give you the whole page from which that first panel is taken, the second panel situates that cartoon avatar of the author in an individual panel all to herself alongside another panel of her peers. Is it not interesting that in that other panel of her peers, what we seem to get, perhaps because of the veil, are other girls who in their seriality look like indistinguishable versions of our author? So here the comic is able to train our eyes to recognize individuality despite seriality, to see the individual despite her drawn indistinguishability from her peers. In the first panel, what we have is a fantasy of immediacy. We are not supposed to see this image of the cartoon as a representation of the author, not at all. This is the author. The fantasy in the second panel, of course, is that the photoreal media, the photograph, is somehow subordinate to the properties of reflection that we get in the comic book. So it upends our normal understanding of a hierarchy of arts, where the photograph would be able to convey something that is transparently objective. And the cartoon is just so obdurately mired in the artist's subjectivity. But we have a suspicion of photography in a lot of comics. This might be some sort of internecine war between media, but in Persepolis, we have a moment where the father goes out to photograph events related to the Islamic Revolution. So he is there with camera in hand, capturing history as it happens. Poor Margie's 10 years old. She can't go to the demonstrations. She can't be on the sidelines of history as it occurs. But in her book, the one we know, we've never heard of her father, we've never seen his photographs. They're not famous, her book is. His photographs are transubstantiated into the stuff of cartoons. And it is only on that level that they bear meaning. We have similar suspicion of photography in Art Spiegelman's enormously popular graphic novel about his father's Holocaust survival, Mouse, in which most of the graphic novel depicts human beings as anthropomorphic mice, except for a few exceptional photographs that are inserted in the panels. This is one of Father Vladek looking far too salubrious in a camp outfit that doesn't seem to associate with our own understanding of what people look like wearing this outfit. He was indeed a survivor, but why does he look so healthy? Why so clean? Because after his camp experience, he went to a place where there was a photography studio, and he donned a camp outfit and had his picture taken. This was his commemorative photograph of his experience. Art Spiegelman has transformed the lie that the photograph engenders here into his own comic memoir. But why the suspicion of photography within comics? To answer, I want to go back to the movies. One of my favorite recent heroes, think Batman with even more psychosis, Rorschach from Alan Moore's Watchmen. Very interesting thing about this character, he wears a mask that is made of some sort of high-tech fugitive substance, where the pattern that we see on that mask is constantly moving. In the comic, however, the pattern on Rorschach's face, which really is kind of like a Rorschach test ink blot, right, is, we know it's supposed to move, but because of the limitations of the comic medium, it never does. We can only ever experience the pattern on Rorschach's mask as a still image. But it has power because of that nonetheless. Its power, I would argue, is for the pattern on the image at any one time in a panel in the comic book to visually echo other patterns, other images we've seen elsewhere in this comic book. For instance, this one pattern called the Hiroshima Lovers, which becomes a graffiti image that you see in the background in so many panels of the world of the Watchmen. Think about what this represents. These are lovers clasping one another amidst certain disaster. The mask can reference this other image of these lovers in a way that the movie never can. That's why we call it the movies. It's a cinema of motion. All our eyes see when we see the Rorschach figure in the movies is how the mask is constantly moving. The pattern is always changing. Ooh, lava lamp. Ooh, lava lamp is very safe. What's not so safe is to be put in the precarious position of someone who is taking a Rorschach test. The comic book wants to make me a patient of its own psychoanalytic, penetrative test. I become its test subject in order to read it. Cinema, passive spectator. Comic, something else. But not only do graphic novels spur us to engage more actively than film, they also allow us to see social relations and abstractions through their complex interplay of words and images. Now, to excavate the implications of that, I want to return to the first two panels of Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis. Remember, the first panel says, "This is me when I was 10 in 1980. It's kind of our readerly contract we enter into this graphic novel. This is what we have to willingly suspend, that disbelief that that is not the author. We want to engage in that fantasy. After all, it is that fantasy which becomes our entree into the world of this comic. Second panel, though, has some interesting information in the caption, which I want to dissect. It says, "You don't see me in this photo. I'm on the far left. I'm not there." I want to ask, oh, really? Why don't I see you? Unless I am being trained at the moment of encountering this panel to observe and impute almost sacred force to the gutter that separates one panel from the other. So, of course, in the other panel, I sure do see you. You just told me this is you when you were 10. So there you are. And in this photo, in the caption, you say, "You don't see me on the far left." Well, there you are on the far left. But I'm supposed to act like I don't see you because the gutter has now this metaphysical, magical power to make me unsee what I obviously see. But even if I don't, you want to transgress from the Latin literally to cross over a line. If I don't want to transgress or violate that rule, why is it that the second panel wants to give me, ever so slightly, the indication of someone cut off on the far left? Don't I see you there? Comics, because they're constructed of two symbol systems, words and images, constantly juxtapose these two symbol systems against each other, creating unique and inimitable effects. Inimitable effects, yes. Here's another one where the claims of the picture unmask the claims of the text. It's from Art Spiegelman's Mouse. It's a moment, very poignantly, where the survivor father is telling his son all what is left are the photos. Interestingly, it comes in a panel that shows us cascading down to the floor a monument of photographs. But the poignancy of this is to suggest that that monument of photographs is all there is. The photographs of people, the actual people, no more. But I look at the way the page explodes with photos, images of photos, cartoon images of photos, and then once again I'm prodded to ask, are photos really all that's left? Hasn't Art Spiegelman, comic artist, second-generation survivor in a way, son of a survivor, captured and revivified what the photograph can never really convey in this comic? Palestine by Joe Sacco. Joe Sacco is a journalist and a cartoonist. He goes to Palestine, he wants to collect stories, doing some thick, descriptive ethnographic fieldwork, good old-fashioned anthropology. But he's going to draw up his results in not-so-good old-fashioned comic book form. There's a moment where he suggests that every time he encounters militarist action on the street that makes him afraid, he rushes off into a taxicab and escapes the scene of imminent violence. But it is in those taxicab escape moments where he encounters unique intimacies with others in the cab. As he says here, "I love the now and then intimacies with fellow passengers, the shared candy, the anecdotes about prisons and beatings. Once a student of electrical engineering pressed me on scholarships in the States. Well, I don't know," he says. "Really, I could find out. My dad's an engineer." And the person that he's there says, "Yes, whatever you can do, I must get out of here." And then we get the captions. Captions are language that exists in another timescape. It's language of the present. It tends to have more authority. He says, "Out of here, out of this." He scribbled his address. "I put it in my pocket and forgot about him forever." Forgot about him forever. Once again, I'm prodded suspiciously to look at the claims of the text and ask how the picture is revealing their fictionality. Did you really forget about this person forever? How could you have forgotten them? Here they are. Here is this very scene in the taxicab drawn so precisely in your comic. So you obviously didn't forget about them. The words claim one thing, the pictures tell us something else. Final example for this, back again to Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis. This is one of those panels that many critics would say showcases what is most unique about comics. The way comics in a single frame can show you complexities of identity and influence that no moving image really could, or moving images could in a different way, but not so concisely, not with such an economy of style. Here our main character, our heroine, is telling us that her world, her sense of identity is determined by two competing cultural influences. Obviously, what is religious about her, we can see immediately because of the veil that seems to bisect her. But the caption says, deep down I was very religious, but as a family we were very modern and avant-garde. So whereas it's very easy for me to figure out what represents religiosity here by where the veil is placed, I would suggest that it's actually very difficult to figure out what iconic symbols in this image are meant to represent the avant-garde or the modern. Could it be the draftsman's tool, the gears in space, or the arabesque and the curlicues? Either one looks avant-garde to me. It really does depend on our perspective. It really does, in fact, depend on the way that we've been trained by the comic to interact with these two sometimes competing symbol systems of the pictorial and the verbal. How we allow them to coalesce. How we trouble the easy way with which they coalesce. How we try to find meaning somewhere in between. In the world of comics, we must learn to see for ourselves, since the whole truth is always a complex interrelation of words and images. Thank you very much.